Hi, everyone. My name is Misha Ghafouri, and I'm the founder of Iranian Youth Connections. And today I will be interviewing Dr. Maryam Baird. A bit more about Iranian Youth Connections. If you aren't familiar, we are a youth-led organization dedicated to creating a welcoming space for Iranian youth to connect and bond with one another, learn more about Iranian culture, and gain the skills to become successful leaders in their community. Through virtual interviews where we bring in successful role models such as medical professionals, entrepreneurs, artists, educators, and much more, we hope to promote Iranian diaspora and empower young Iranians. And I'm so glad to be joined today by Dr. Maryam Baird, who is an OB-GYN physician from Houston, Texas, who has been practicing for over 17 years. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we can kind of jump right into it, but a bit before we begin, would you be able to tell everyone a little bit more about yourself, since I kind of gave a brief introduction?
Okay, well, my name is Maryam Baird. I am an OB-GYN physician. For those who don't know, OB-GYN stands for obstetrics and gynecology. So what that means is basically the obstetrics part is taking care of women during pregnancy and childbirth and after. The gynecology part is basically taking care of every other aspect of the woman when it as it pertains to her reproductive organs. I live and work in Houston. I've lived here for most of my life. I'm part of a large group of private practice OB-GYN physicians. It is a private group, so I'm part owner of this group, all working at the Women's Hospital of Texas, which is right by the Texas Medical Center in the heart of Houston.
Thank you so much. Okay, so my first question is a bit more about your childhood and your upbringing. So I was wondering if you could tell everyone a bit more about your immigration from Iran to America, what that experience was like. Were there any particular hardships you faced, and how has that, early experience in your childhood kind of shaped you into the person you are today?
Let's see. I moved to the United States when I was 10. So I finished elementary school in Iran. I started 6th grade here in Houston. I spoke minimal English when I came here. So initially when I came, I was in ESL classes, or English as a second language classes. So all my English classes and most of my other subjects were all ESL classes for the first 3 years that I was here. So all the way through middle school, I was still learning the language. My dad moved to the United States before we did. So he left about a year before we did so that he could establish a home and a job and, be able to support us. So a year later, my mom and my 2 sisters joined him. We spent a few months in Europe, initially getting rejected and not being able to make it to the United States, but eventually we made it here. We had, a couple of my uncles that lived here in Houston. So that became home base since they were there, and we've been here ever since. Hardships, really honestly, the hardships have mostly been, when we initially moved, my parents. I was young, I was 10 years old. So I can't necessarily say that I initially suffered too much coming here. It really was very difficult for my parents. It was obvious and tangible how difficult it was for them to make that transition. For my mom to be towing 3 kids across the globe with her to the United States, to a country where she truly did not speak the language. She was a professional in Iran, came to the United States and had to learn architecture the way it was done in a completely different system, and eventually be able to get a job to be able to help support the family, for my dad to be able to establish a job and became stable to be able to really start from scratch and be able to support us, leaving a lot of their family behind as they did all of that. Really, truly, the hardship was all theirs. For us, I think it was really mostly just learning a language, learning a new culture, which when you're a kid, you assimilate. I don't necessarily think it was that hard. It was definitely some assimilation. There was some shocks that we went through, but it was temporary. We got through it. We went from what I like to think was, uh, elementary school in a Islamic fundamentalist country where we were all covered from head to toe,
Mhm.
to what we later realized was probably one of the roughest middle schools in inner city Houston. So th- it was a shock. It was a shock. It was a school where I remember in the sixth grade, the girl who used to sit next to me in English class ended up dropping out because she got pregnant.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
we had somebody in my sister's class who was arrested for drug dealing. We had, um, let's see, one of the guys who was at the bus stop with us, who used to stand at our bus stop in the mornings, died of a drug overdose. I mean, it was a culture shock, to say the least. But in a way, we were sort of separated from a lot of that because our communication was so limited. So we weren't really part of that community. We were really more spectators, watching this, mess around us. So by the time I got to high school, so I was, I had 3 years of the language under my belt. I felt a lot more comfortable. I was in all, regular classes by that point. Ended up going to, it was still public school, but it was a magnet high school. It was the high school for health professions. So the environment was just different. The kids were different. So at that point in time, I think I can comfortably say we were pretty much assimilated and moving forward.
Mhm.
That was also at the point where I had already decided that I wanted to, eventually go to medical school and become a doctor.
Mhm. Did the language barrier like affect your academic performance? Did you feel like, were you like behind the first few years that you came, and how was that? Was that really stressful? How did that work
It
out?
depends. It depends on what subject you're talking about. So the math and sciences was actually, I was ahead
Oh, really?
once I figured out the language enough to be able to understand the questions. My math was way ahead of the United States. So I ended up being in like regular math and science class beyond that first year. But English, I still don't think I've caught up in English. English really did end up being a struggle for years to come because I don't think, I lost a lot of the foundation without, since I didn't have elementary school here. I don't think my reading speed ever quite caught up to anybody else. So I did struggle a bit more with a lot of like my standardized testing. I remember the SAT was just the most difficult, horrific test of my life. So really throughout my life, there was a lot more concentration on trying to just finish the standardized test. Not necessarily that I couldn't do well with it. I just couldn't finish them. I couldn't read fast enough. The reading comprehension was just not good enough. So that part of it was a little bit of a struggle, but I think I did all right.
Yeah, honestly, with growing up in the US, I still struggle with the SAT, so that's pretty funny. But I also wanted to add to your point about like like having to learn English. I feel like a lot of times when immigrants come to the US, you hear remarks where people say like, oh, you speak good English, which first of all, it's grammatically wrong, that sentence. But second of all, I feel like people don't even realize that this person is learning a second language. Like they already have their first language that they're fluent in, that most Americans can't even say that they're like bilingual. So I feel like that's something that people don't realize, is that maybe it's hard for them to speak English, but they're already like so fluent and can speak eloquently in another language. And I think, yeah, it's a very interesting situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So another question I had was kind of like, throughout your immigration and kind of like, growing up in the US, how were you able to assimilate into American culture, but, making sure not to lose your Persian identity? And now that you're older, have you been able to kind of like, teach your children about what it means to be Iranian, and kind of continue to maintain a relationship with your, your heritage and your family and your Iranian background?
The biggest factor from that standpoint in my life is my family, my extended family. That's truly what's kept me connected. So, my maiden name is Hakimzadeh. My married name is Baird. So I've married an American. English is the primary language that's obviously spoken in my own home, since my husband doesn't speak English. Doesn't speak Farsi. So it really is my parents and my extended family that's really kept me, very much so attached to my Iranian identity. Little by little, over all of these years that we've been here, we've managed to gather a pretty sizable number of our family members here around us in Houston. So when we gather with just us, it's like just the 20 of us at least, right? So the majority of the language that's spoken whenever it's just the 20 of us ends up being Farsi. I have a 99-year-old grandfather who doesn't really speak English. So we have to be able to keep him engaged in the conversation and not exclude him. And therefore the language always ends up steering in that direction. As we were growing up, we actually had a rule in our house that my mom and dad wouldn't allow us to speak English at home. And that was really for that pointed purpose of, they knew that we were going to pick up English. We were going to learn English. We'll be fine, but we could lose Farsi. So they very much so stress that. And still to this day, I can't talk to my mom or my dad in English. I have to talk to them in Farsi. It's uncomfortable. It's unnatural. Right. So they've been really, really good about trying to keep all the traditions and, continue to celebrate Nowruz and celebrate Yalda and whatever, just the different traditions that we have. They've been very good about continuing that and being able to pass it down to the next generation. So I do have my parents to thank for that. And then on a different note, a different angle that I have is now at this point in time, after 17 years of practice, about a quarter of my patient population is Iranian.
Oh, really?
So I'm getting a lot from them, right? So there's a lot of my Iranian population, Iranian patients, they're specifically seeking me out because I speak Farsi, so that they can have somebody that they can communicate with better, which means that most of the ones that are coming to find me is because their English is not that good. So majority of those people have been more recent immigrants from Iran. So I get a lot from them. I get a lot from, just having their medical history come over and, hey, this is what I did in Iran, and this is what they diagnosed me with, and this is what I've done. And I learn about what goes on in Iran by what they bring me and tell me within my offices. And, little by little, I've gotten to know a lot of the Iranian community here, not necessarily because I've gone out there to meet them, but because they've come into my doors and seeked me out. So it's kept me more connected to the Iranian community outside of my family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight two of the points you talked about, because I think it's really interesting. One, that you said how your parents had a rule of you only have to speak Farsi in the household. I think that's really interesting, because a lot of times first generation immigrants who come to the US, they want their family to assimilate so much into American households, that I've read, different stories about how they have the opposite rule in the house, that you have to be learning English and you have to make sure to practice speaking English as much as possible. But I hope as new generations of immigrants come, we kind of learn that. I feel kids pick up English so fast that you end up losing your ancestral language. So I think that's really important.
Right. You're completely immersed in English. There's no way you're gonna not learn it.
Yeah.
It's the language that you're not immersed in that you're gonna end up losing. I think there was a daycare teacher of my younger sisters when we first moved to the United States that really stressed that to my parents when we first got here.
Oh, really?
Don't worry about her. She'll learn English. Don't let her lose Farsi.